Welcome to the notes for 8.5. In these notes, we are going to practice the skill of dividing with unit fractions. So go ahead and set up the header at the top of your notes. Remember, as we're doing the notes, you can pause whenever you need to, or some kids like to just watch the notes and then go back and build their notes page. You do what works for you. So let's start by talking about this idea of unit fractions. What even is a unit fraction? So the big idea with a unit fraction is that it has a 1 in the numerator. It means one piece of some size. So when we're talking about unit fractions, we can think about fraction examples to help us get the idea of unit fractions. We can use unit fractions like 1/2 or 1/3, 1/8, or if you want to get real creative, we could even use like 1/516. All of these are unit fractions because they all have a 1 in the numerator. So if that got a little bit cut off, you make sure when you do your notes that's a 1 in the numerator. So basically I have one piece and then my denominator helps me know what size that piece is. So all of our dividing today is going to be done with unit fractions. When you get to 6th grade, you start to explore other types of fractions that you can divide with, but here in 5th grade, we're really anchoring to this idea of unit fractions. All right, so now we're going to set up the first half of this skill. So right underneath our line, we are going to write that we're dividing a whole number by a unit fraction. So go ahead and we're going to write that. Ooh, I'm going to rewrite it so it fits better. Notes don't have to be perfect, we just do our best. All right, so to understand this skill, let's start with an example problem. That'll help us be able to process what it means to divide by a unit fraction. So let's do this division problem. 3 divided by 1/4. I'm just going to zoom in here a little. All right, so when we do 3 divided by 1/4, let's talk about what that means. It really means that we have 3 of something, and we're breaking it up into groups of 1/4. So we're dividing it by groups of 1/4. So let's do some drawing of this to really understand what it means to have 3 of something and to divide it into groups of 1/4. So right below this, I am going to draw 3 rectangles to represent my whole number 3. It could be 3 pounds or 3 hours or 3 miles. It doesn't really matter what it is, but I'm going to draw these 3 rectangles to represent 3 of something. That's what we have in this scenario. All right, so this is the 3 at the start of my problem. Oops, let me fix that. I didn't like the way that looked. There we go. All right, so we've got 3 of something, and now we need to divide it. We're going to divide it into groups of 1/4. So for this drawing, I'm going to use a dashed line to represent that I'm dividing. That way it doesn't just look like a fraction, it looks like I'm dividing. So I need to divide it into groups of 1/4. The easiest way to do fourths is to split it in half and then split each half in half. So I did that with my first whole number. Now I can do that with my second one and the third one. So now that we look at what we've drawn here, we can see we had 3 whole numbers, and each of those numbers was split up into groups of 1/4. Now I want to be careful here. I'm not dividing by 1/4. or I'm not dividing by 4. Sometimes people like to say I'm dividing by 4 because I split it into 4 pieces. The difference here is if I'm doing 3 divided by 4, that means I'm taking 3 and I'm sharing it with 4 people. I'm not doing that. In this situation, I've got 3 and I'm breaking it up into groups of 1/4. So let's go ahead and start labeling each of those pieces. I've got 1 group of 1/4 and 2 groups of 1/4, 3 groups of 1/4, 4 groups of 1/4. Got this pattern going. So now I'm just going to keep labeling. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So what we've done here is we split 3 up into groups of 1/4. And when I look at it all, I can see that we have 12 groups of 1/4. So if I take 3 and I split it up into groups of 1/4, I now have 12 pieces. So then let's think about the math here. What's really happening? We're going to write how many groups of 1/4 can you make? That's really what we're asking ourselves here. And so let's set up our division problem again. We were doing 3 divided by 1/4. And since we could make 12 groups, our answer is 12. That's the big idea. We took a whole number, we broke it up into fractional pieces, and then we counted how many pieces we could make. So that's the first skill. I'm going to draw a line across and slide my page down. Let's take a look at the next skill. To start, we divided a whole number by a unit fraction, and now we're ready to do the opposite. Let me get this set up. There we go. So the opposite is divide a unit fraction by a whole number. All right, so before we started with a sample problem, so let's do that here. For this one, we're going to try to do 1/3 divided by 5. All right, so in our first example, we started with the whole number 3. So let's think about this one. In a division problem, the first number represents what you're starting with. So for this one, it means that you have 1/3 of something and you're splitting it up into 5 groups. All right, so we've got 1/3 of something and you're splitting it up into 5 groups. So we're going to do a different type of drawing to show what we're starting with. In the last one, we started with a whole number, but now we're starting with 1/3. So I'm going to draw a box to show that 1/3. To make it easier, I'm going to make sure that my box is 5 spaces tall. All right, I'm going to make like a big rectangle. And I made sure it was 5 lines tall. That'll make it easier. All right, and now we want to show 1/3. So I'm going to split this shape up into thirds. And then we can color in one of those pieces to show we're starting with a value of 1/3. You can use light blue like me or whatever color you'd like. But it would be really smart to use a color. It'll make it easier to see. All right, so there's the 1/3 we have, and now I need to split it into 5 groups. In order to show that, I'm going to use that dotted line strategy like we used in the earlier division example. And I want to split my 1/3 into 5 different groups. So using my dotted line here, I'm splitting into 5 groups. And then I'm going to take one of those pieces. So if I took that 1/3 and broke it up into 5 groups, I'm going to use my lines to show one of those groups. All right, so then let's think about what this really means. What I'm really trying to figure out is if I had 1/3 of something and I split it into 5 pieces, what size would each piece be? Basically, what size piece do you get? So then let's go back and rewrite the expression we're trying to solve. We were doing 1/3 divided by 5. And when we split that 1/3 up into 5 pieces, we get pieces that are the size 1/15. Now we can figure out that it's 15ths by counting all the pieces in a whole number to see what they're worth. So these are the 2 different division skills we're working on in this module. We're trying to figure out how to divide a whole number by a unit fraction and how to divide a unit fraction by a whole number. Now before we move on, there's one other pattern I want to point out. You've probably already noticed it, but there's another pattern. So go ahead and grab a highlighter, or I'm going to use yellow. And let's look at the first example. I had 3 divided by 1/4, and my answer was 12. And I see a pattern there because I know that 3 and 4 are both factors of 12. 3 times 4 is 12. I started with a whole number, and I ended up with a whole number. Now in the bottom example, I did 1/3 divided by 5, and I got 1/15. And I know that 3 times 5 gives me 15. I started with a fraction, and I ended up with a fraction. We'll explore this pattern more, and you'll really explore it in 6th grade, but it helps to spot it as we're working.